This conference will now be recorded.
I would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone who is attending on our 7th evidence webinar entitled Spotlighting Capacity Enhancement Activities, Networks and Opportunities Across EIDM in Africa, an AEN study. In this webinar, you will hear the results of the study conducted by the AEN Secretariat that explored the capacity development activities of EIDM organizations in Africa. The study also investigated potential for collaboration across institutions working in a similar space in Africa. You will also hear about the innovations, the ideas, and suggestions from 32 organizations that participated in the study. Dr. Linda and Dr. Nasreen Jessani from the AEN Secretariat will share the ongoing and planned activities in response to the recommendations of this study. Before we begin with the webinar, let's go through a few rules of engagement so that we have an exciting and fruitful discussion for the next hour, 15 minutes. Can all the participants please mute your microphones and unmute when you are speaking? Can we also use the chat to keep the conversation going? If you have questions, please use the chat and we'll make sure that we manage the chat, and also key questions that are asked by members on the chat will be pulled in during the Q&A question time in the last 15 minutes of this webinar to ensure that all the questions that might be of interest to the participants are also answered. And also we will be recording this webinar. And just note also the slides and the recorded version of this webinar will be available to the participants. If you have any more questions outside the time of the webinar, please keep in touch with us through our ACE email and our social media platforms that will be shared with you in the slide at the end of this webinar. So I think as the AEN, we are really excited about this study because this study came about when some of our members were asking, how do we work with other institutions? Because AEN is an individual membership and network. So this came from our members to say, how do we work with other institutions? How do we explore capacity development activities? So this is in response of the needs of some of our members. So this is what the AEN is about. We are member driven and we ensure that we meet the needs of our members. Without wasting any time, I'll give the platform to Dr. Linda Etale to present the findings of the study that they undertook. Thank you very much. Ms. Dr. Linda.
A total of 32 organizations working in the field of evidence-informed decision-making in our continent, Africa. Without further ado, please allow me to, as I guide you through what we have prepared for you. So we endeavor to obtain an understanding of activities, capacities of organizations in Africa working in the field of EIDM. Just to emphasize, this was an EIDM, or evidence-informed decision-making in Africa survey. We wanted to understand what these organizations are doing in terms of EIDM capacity development on the continent, how they perceive the role of the AEN, and what the AEN can do to collaborate better with them. As a point of emphasis, this study focused on organizations based in Africa working in the field of EIDM and not individuals. We recognize that some respondents might have been members of the AEN, but the focus was not on them, but the organizations that they represented in the study. As mentioned before, the AEN wanted to have informed understanding, or rather an informed understanding of these EIDM-focused organizations in Africa, how collaboration amongst organizations can be realized, among others, but most importantly, where there are opportunities for the AEN. You'll realize that we also sought to specifically interview networks and associations, reasons to which we'll share as we move along. The research paradigm, so the research paradigm that we explored, that was employed by this study was qualitative. And the slide you are seeing shows the process that we engaged in. We selected participants through purposive and snowball sampling. We received a lot of support from a number of organizations who referred us to the persons we should reach out to interview. We had an interview guide on hand just to guide the interviewer. We also had interviews that were 60 minutes long on average through an online platform, and we also used the telephone where the online platform was not working. The interviews were recorded with consent. We used framework analysis and an inductive approach to make sense of the data, which we'll discuss in depth. We have since been sharing the results with our internal teams, that is at the Africa Evidence Network, and also the larger Africa Center for Evidence, through presentations and also a seminar. We must say that we have been taking into consideration some of the recommendations, and also just to say that a report will be shared at an appropriate point in time. Let me just spend a little bit of time just on the kind of respondents we worked with. So it is important that we share the thinking and the process behind obtaining interviewees. A previous study by the Africa Center for Evidence identified over 250 organizations in Africa that work in the realm of evidence-informed decision-making. However, to focus the study on organizations that have a deliberate focus or approach to EIDM, we subjected that list to what you can see as an inclusion and exclusion criteria on your screen. Eventually, we ended up with 90 organizations that we targeted by sending out invitations to participate in the study. So out of the 90 organizations, we had 32 organizations eventually participating, with a total of 32 respondents. That is the interviewees. Just to mention that we sent out invitations to 252 individuals, which leaded the 36 respondents I have just mentioned. Please have a look at the exclusion criteria to see what kind of organizations we excluded before I move on. Okay, moving along. As I mentioned before, this was a qualitative study, and the two angles we took to look at the data were descriptive and analytical. For now, let us focus on the descriptive, where we had collected data on organizations and also the respondents. Let us begin with the respondents. As I'd mentioned before, we managed to get 36 respondents that we interviewed, and these were from 32 organizations within Africa. Just to say that, or to emphasize that, the respondents had to be holding a position in mid to senior level management, and therefore able to speak from an organizational perspective and not a personal one. So they needed to be able to demonstrate engagement in the organization's EIDM activities, for instance, through their position in the organization's activities, public posts such as blogs, publications, amongst others. And lastly, they had to possess the ability to communicate in English and or French. So out of these 32 organizations that I mentioned as having participated, 10 identified themselves as having been embedded within another organization, while 32 said that they were standalone organizations. Also, I would like to mention that 7 out of the 32 organizations that we worked with identified either as networks or associations. If you might be wondering why the distinction that brought about, the network or association sessions, we will delve deeper in the slides to come. So please have a look at the figure that you're seeing on your screens that shows the sectors in which that two organizations identified with when we interviewed them. This is in respect to the EIDM work that they do in Africa. You can see that the sector with the highest number of organizations among the 32 organizations was health. You can see it at 27 right up on the screen. There were others who also decided to be more specific in terms of technical engagements rather than just being sector specific, as you can see on the light blue section or the table on the right. Let me move along. So here we wanted to understand how long these 32 organizations have been working in the field of EIDM. So you can see that on the extreme left-hand side of the figure, you can see that 14 out of them, of the 32 organizations, indicated that they were well established in the field of EIDM. But we also have those who might have been considered nascent. If you look at the rest of the figure. All right. On this particular slide, we asked 32 organizations to be specific about the country in which they're based, or what they would consider to be their primary location. And the map here, as you can see, gives a picture of that representation. So looking at the map, you will see that South Africa had the highest concentration of organizations which we interviewed. We have been looking at descriptive data. Now, let us look at the analytical bit of it. So we used, as I'd mentioned before, we used a framework analysis and inductive approach that we came up with, where we came up with themes based on data. As long as we had 3 or more similar ideas that spoke to the same topic, we created a theme for it. Where we had 1 or 2 ideas only in a particular theme, we looked at these keenly to see if it made sense for them to be integrated in other themes. So we organized our interview guide mainly to cover these substantive areas that you can see on the slide. As you can see, we were keen to find out the kind of activities that enhance evidence use in decision making that these organizations engaged in. Further, we sought to find out the enabling and constraining factors that these organizations face as they implement their capacity enhancement activities. We also had the opportunity to obtain an understanding on how these organizations can engage with the AEN. Finally, we took a look at networks and associations, looking at their membership, scope, functions, as well as factors that enable and constrain their functioning as organizations. All right. So here now we are going to take a look at the kind of activities that organizations say they engaged in, particularly those that enhance evidence use in decision making. We'll also see the enabling and constraining factors that these organizations face as they implement capacity development activities. If you look at this graph, you will see a myriad of activities that were identified with as those that enhance evidence use in decision making. It was interesting for us to note that a good number of organizations were involved in policy advocacy. If you can take your time to identify it, where we have a marker of 16 at different levels of government and departments. It was also important for these organizations that they impact the process of decision making that goes on, into policy making. Quite impressive was capacity development at your extreme left on the graph, as an activity that enhances evidence use in decision making, as it had 28 out of 32 organizations identifying with it. So there were those organizations focused on strengthening certain systems, such as M&E, monitoring and evaluation, including national evaluation systems. Those that conducted trainings on various capacity areas, such as advocacy, among others. Okay. So in this section, we had respondents take their time to consider the kind of elements that aided the organization's capacity development activities. Let me begin with on your extreme left. Let me begin with expertise and capacity in niche areas. So we had a myriad of contributions, but let us look at this particular one. An organization in South Africa indicated that the kind of activities, the kind of research they do always, allows for multidisciplinary expertise, and therefore the organization benefits from various experts rather than if they just siloed, if they were siloed as a way of working. So let's go to the next one on common values as an enabling factor. It was mentioned that having passion for sustainable development by a particular organization wires the interventions in ways that are part of solutions to development problems. This is despite the fact that taking this perspective actually comes with cost to it. Another one mentioned that all organizations it engages with are bound by an importance of the African agency and African-led thinking and process of change. Okay, so as we continue, having a conducive learning environment was another enabling factor. For instance, platforms for meeting various experts, such as meetings to address certain critical issues of evidence work. Evidence work actually keeps the network alive. This is a network contributing. On funding for capacity development as a factor, a number of organizations actually referred to funding that they obtain from various donor agencies for specific capacity areas. Some of the donor agencies that they mentioned included the World Bank, UNICEF, UNDP, among others. So let us look at supportive governance and management of organizations. On this one, various organizations, especially networks and associations, spoke to dedicated, having a dedicated board of members who give their time and strategic direction faithfully actually is a supportive or an enabling factor in their organization's capacity development activities. Okay, when it came to those who identified with strong and collaborative partnerships as a factor, enabling factor, we have organizations that cited diversity of the kind of experts across different sectors that they can call upon as an enabling factor. So from these connections, they say that they're able to draw on the best available evidence and also enhance different capacities within their organizations. If you look at political will and demand for evidence in policy making as an enabling factor, there was an example of an organization based in Cote d'Ivoire, which indicated that over the past 2 decades, they have experienced, two presidents in this organization who have championed learning and evaluation, learning from evaluation to the whole organization, from research based on evaluations. So they spoke to this as a push factor. Lastly, on HR development and capacity development approaches as an enabling factor, a number of organizations mentioned, including the availability of a bursary scheme, for example, within an organization for staff, or also secondment of senior staff to policy committees, encouraging members to participate in capacity development activities where they present their papers was some of the examples they gave as HR development being an enabling factor. Let's look at, we're also able to talk to them about, or rather find out what would be the constraining factors when they're doing, capacity development activities. So let me speak to non-supportive government policy issues. There's, where, as an example, an institute within a ministry mentioned that government officials that they advise and also do knowledge translation for seem to take up such knowledge, but practically they rely on their own political views rather than using evidence-based research products that the institute actually provides to them. Let me also give you an example on how human resource and organizational infrastructure capacity issues were cited as a constraining factor. The a higher education institution that we spoke to cited lack of experts in the market on EIDM, especially stemming from the fact that these institutions, higher education institutions, training curriculum does not capture EIDM. So on funding issues on capacity development as a factor, constraining factor, one of the issues here was that training new employees on EIDM relies heavily on funding that is not consistent with the prevailing needs of staff. Also, language and or rather communication barriers was also mentioned by various organizations, but one stood out here. They mentioned that some experts present their work in very technical language, which hinders effective communication, especially where you're having researchers and evaluators working together on certain projects, capacity development projects. So finally, we have conflicting interests as a constraining factor that was mentioned. For instance, some organizations mentioned that time will always be a constraining factor for research organizations who have staff that are allowed, that are also involved in like teaching. Maybe they have classes. Okay, so we will present an analysis on how we can all work together to enhance the EIDM ecosystem. We will have a look at three entities, that is individuals, the second one organizations, and also networks. So we'll have a look at them just to get more insight as having spoke to the respondents. So we sought to find out, kindly take your time just to look at this particular slide and follow me as I direct you. So we sought to find out from these organizations that we spoke to those areas around evidence-informed decision-making, capacity development that a network such as the AEN may support to develop. The ideas we got from these respondents were many, but they have been summarized within each section, as you can see on this slide. So you can see that I have three sections. Starting from the extreme right, we have the individual section, going down, also in purple, organizational, and then on your extreme right, you'll see the network section. So, so the ideas we got from the respondents were many, as I said, but we summarized them in each of the three sections I've just mentioned. We may, for the purpose of this presentation, call them recommendations. But before that, I would like to just take time to emphasize that some of the interviewees were members of the AEM and some were not, which is reflected therefore in the results, because some of them know as well and some of them do not. So around key priorities, particularly they were only able to tell us what our priorities should be if perhaps they know us a little better. If you look at the section under individual on the extreme left on the upper section, you will see 6 recommendations, while the other two, that is the organizational and network, also have about the same. So the middle colorful section are the AN activities that are already being implemented in response to recommendations given by the respondents based on the 3 areas: the individual, organizational, and the network. I will not speak on all of these, but let me guide you on a few. Let me give an example from the individual section. When you look at the second item under the individual, that is on capacity enhancement of all involved in EIDM, There are some organizations that propose that the AN provides information on training opportunities, specifically on evidence use and integrated evidence in policy making for individuals to benefit from. So the AN is already leveraging available technology using its social media platforms such as Twitter, also the monthly newsletter to share such information. Being a member of the AN might help in accessing the kind of information I'm talking about. Still on capacity enhancement, on EIDM, the AN has opportunities for learning through the evidence conferences. In the past, we've had them in 2014, 2016, and the year 2018. We are also now preparing for one this year in September. So let us look at the section that that capture organizational recommendations. Look at the purple, where it's written organizational in purple. So when it comes to, let me pick one that is on learning, sharing, and collaborating at the towards the end of that particular section. A recommendation was given on encouraging communities of practice as an approach to enable organizations, learn from each other's experience and benefit from opportunities to collaborate on projects. This they would like for the AN to actually support at the individual level. The AN is already providing platforms for organizations to identify and team up based on common interests, including the conferences I have just mentioned, online festivals, webinars, the AN Learning Hub, which is found on our website, among others. Others mentioned the AN facilitating linkages towards creation of consortiums to collectively, bid for funding and implement, and also the implementation of projects. The AN might not be able, might only be able to provide the environment for organizations to identify each other based on their interests and also share opportunities through these platforms on funding opportunities. At the network level, as we engage with the interviewees, one recommendation. So I'm talking about the right side where we have the network. So one recommendation was about how effective networks can engage with the AN. This is based on the fact that they have members just like AN. So we had some networks who were engaging with us in the study. The issue was on how their members can benefit from the AN because they're already a membership-based organization. Another interesting angle was when one respondent said that the AN can support networks to engage in new frontiers networking with African regional organizations such as the African Center for Disease Control and that's CDC and IGAD. So still on the networks, there was a recommendation on how the AN can support networks in resource mobilization or fundraising. Already the AN shares such information through its platforms, but we also realized that this information might not be primarily accessible to AN members who are individuals. So this information might primarily just be accessible to AN members who are individuals and not for the networks. We also have that networks of organizations. We also have what we have called special initiatives that you can see on the blue section of the middle section of the slide. Language translation, specifically French, is being done. In French is being done in response to the recommendation on communication enhancement on the individual section up here. The Africa Evidence Leadership Award is also an initiative that is already creating awareness on EIDM by honoring and recognizing people who have raised awareness of evidence-informed decision making in Africa. So those are some of the special initiatives that we engaged in. These are just but a fraction of the ideas that the study received. Above all, one of the cross-cutting recommendation was that platforms for obtaining information, tools and guidelines on EIDM that individuals, organizations and networks can access Of course, the AN is already utilizing its platforms, such as the Learning Hub. You can also look at the website and social media platforms, as mentioned earlier, just to share information. We also recognize that more can be done. So this particular slide actually gives us an angle or a lens in which we can look at how organizations see as supporting individuals, organizations, and networks. Let me move on. Here on this slide, so part of this study was dedicated to exploring potential collaboration of the AEN with organizations, keeping in mind that currently membership is for individuals only. So we sought to use this opportunity to find out how the AEN can be of support to organizations, evidence-informed decision-making activities. So what you're seeing on the slide now is interventions that organizations, proposed. You'll also realize that most of it is on capacity enhancement, if I may say. As you read through them, as you go through them, there are specific contributions that stood out in addition to what you already seen. For example, one organization asked, how can the AEN ensure that members have relationships such that, for instance, if an organization or individual posts something on Twitter, they would be sure that such an action would cause others within the network to engage as organizations. So another one also talked about devising mechanisms that ensure building meaningful networks, especially those that result into collaborations in activities such as joint resource mobilization and co-producing EIDM products. Others talked about encouraging South-to-South learning. Another one proposed that the AEN consider developing skills of members in advocacy. Also, that the AEN should consider conceptualizing a consensus on how to think about research impact collectively, rather than, competitively. So this consensus aspect of the different organizations at different levels of research for EIDM working together might be an appealing factor to funders, they thought. These are just but a few of those areas that we identified as areas of synergy. So organizations that we interviewed actually knew exactly what their capacities are as far as EIDM is concerned. So apart from AEN supporting the EIDM activities, rather their EIDM activities, we sought to find out if they can identify certain capacities that they do have that the AEN can benefit from. So on the slide that you're seeing right now, you can see some of these capacities that they mentioned. These are just a few, but we just thought we should. There are many others that they talked about. However, let me also mention that there are other organizations that offer to be points of reference, information and connections for the AEN in different countries. There are others who actually offered to share resources such as expertise, guidelines, time, and specifically, responses were specific to the fields of these organizations. For example, where we had monitoring and evaluation and evidence-informed decision making. How to introduce evidence in policy and knowledge translation. Another area was, concepts in EIDM, application of these concepts, and how to promote access to evidence and ways of communicating research, among others. There was also willingness to share lessons on policy advocacy in a fairly politically restricted environment. We had some organizations that interviewed having come from politically restricted environments. So there's also another organization who would like to share expertise in producing citizen evidence apart from the standard research evidence, and they would support other organizations to achieve the same. That's what they said. Some organizations were also specific about how well they're known in the evidence and policy space, and they offered to participate in joint resource mobilization. So we must say that the information we were looking for here, as you can look at the slide, was that which resonated sort of with symbiotic relationships that organizations can have with us, the Africa Evidence Network. So it's like give and take, if I may say so. There are several interesting responses that stood out for us, such as there's a particular organization that said it would like to be involved in co-designing a kind of advocacy agenda around evidence use to ensure that where there are meetings within this with the same stakeholders, we are actually moving forward and not always about the same thing. There would be, value in establishing a coalition to devise an advocacy strategy that speaks to our respective interests, just to, help getting better traction when it comes to advocacy work. There's an organization that also said it can mentor and host students on evidence-informed decision-making capacity areas, and also but they'll also be gaining from having these students as human resource. Another one said that they will be willing to support the AN in its conferences and training sessions, exactly by facilitating or providing expertise, even as the AN does the same for their activities. Lastly, if I can mention that also speaking to each other when developing and disseminating knowledge products was also an area of where we can work together, or because both of us are always often putting in the same market. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, we set aside questions that we wanted to ask organizations that identified as networks or associations. So let's have a look. The main reason, especially when you are asking the question, there's this particular question you're asking, are you a network or association, is we assumed that the fact that they deal with a multitude of members will help us think about the challenges and enablers that they face as we think about how we engage with our members as the Africa Evidence Network. So it was more about organizations that have memberships that are constituted of members, not necessarily looking at their legal status. So I'd just like to make that clear. We were particularly interested in asking these 32 organizations if they saw themselves as network or associations, for the only reason that they deal with a diverse set of members, as I said, and we're also hoping that they would provide us with some learning, given that we are also an organization with a diverse set of members. I'm just laying emphasis. So it was not that we were trying to, evaluate them as a network or association. We just wanted to see what was similar about them in a way that we can learn and how we can, how we operate. So I hope that is clear. As I mentioned before, out of the 32 organizations that we were able to work with, 4 were networks and 3 were associations. If you can look at the slide. In the middle, the slides. So this slide just shows you the geographical coverage of the networks or associations that we interviewed, and also who they serve on the extreme right of the slide. So on this slide, you'll see that what these organizations identified as core functions. We have about 8 of them, but other interesting functions that we noted that are not necessarily on the slide, or rather they're in relation to what is on the slide. On professionalizing, you can see on the green icon there, which has professionalization of the society. Let me just stress that. Let me just highlight that this was about developing, professional standards of ethics, credentialization of members of that particular society, addressing matters of and also addressing matters of competence. There's one society in Kenya that represents evaluators, and they are currently working with legislators. So this was at the time of the interviews. They said that they're currently working with legislators, lobbying for formal recognition through law, similar to that of the Law Society of Kenya. This will definitely, help them have an impact in terms of holding to account how the government embraces evaluation versus resources projected to be used or already, or those that are already being used. Then there is undertaking advocacy initiatives to increase the use of evaluation um, um, data by decision makers. That was another function. And then also another function that stood out was also advocacy for the use of evidence, in government development projects. This is one of the core functions in one of the networks or associations that we interviewed. Okay, so it seemed that we had four main factors that enable their functioning. It is not surprising that many of these will be similar to those that we already talked about when you look at the organizations. Maybe just to quickly say that, when you look at the first one on political or government goodwill, there was a network that indicated government support has been, positive, especially on the need and use of monitoring evaluation on government projects. So this network has therefore involved, government officials in its activities. One particular aspect of these engagements has been on evaluation of government projects versus the impact of funding and the uptake on the use of evidence by government departments, since they are officials are actually members of this particular network. On the second one, where we have interest and buy-in, there's an association that say that they are the only association of its kind in that particular country, contributing to, this actually contributes to their convening power. It therefore elicits a lot of interest from various organizations, they say, with different backgrounds. Hence, their high membership and funds in terms of, fees that the members pay. Let's look at the third one, commitment from members to support the growth of the networks. So there's a particular association that acknowledges the opportunities it has in the EIDM field and continues to explore, the same through attending, thematic conferences identified to benefit the association, where it also sells its brand. And maybe just on the last one, sustainable funding for network activities, is an association that indicated that the fact that members' contributions, specifically annual fees, are not tied as compared to those from external funding. It enables the association to decide how to use the financial resources for the benefit of the association, if I may say. Okay, we also looked at the constraining factors to their functioning. So there are various challenges that they identified, but I'll only speak to two. So firstly, human resource challenges. I'm going to speak to those that probably came out a bit more. So human resource challenges, specifically on the issue of lack of permanent secretariat, because mostly the secretariat is there on a voluntary basis, which means that they do not function optimally or as they would like. Because having a secretariat, a permanent one, requires, for example, a remuneration, amongst other issues. So, secondly, on members misunderstanding the purpose of the network, which you can see at the extreme left. There was a network that said sometimes there's confusion among members who mistake the network to be a grant-making institution, which is not the case. So they end up being frustrated and are also not satisfied with the fact that membership in such a network does not involve, getting grants. So after we've presented all this information to you, plus more that we couldn't just share in this brief period of this webinar, we decided to look at the next steps. So we would like to share what we consider as next steps. There are those recommendations that we have already been taking up, as I've said before. Those that we might consider because there are those that we might not consider because they're not within our mandate as a network. But then there are those that we will keep in mind for future, especially those that require resources that we do not have at the moment, but we can plan on them as time goes. But most importantly, we will also reach out to other organizations or individuals who might want to collaborate with us, just based on the recommendations that have been presented that were presented by the respondents. Um, of course, like any other study, this one also had its strengths and limitations, and I will not go through this, but I'm willing to take up any questions, or we can take up any questions that may arise on this. So let me just say that I would like to pass gratitude to the AN secretariat that's provided all the support that we needed to make the study possible, and also the Africa Center for Evidence staff, who spared their time on various occasions to just review the study documents and just advise us, and most importantly the respondents, um, who were very patient with us through the process and gave us as much information as they possibly could, and also just their time during the interviews. So thank you all for just being patient with me and listening. And let me just save time and hand over back to Siziwe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Etale, for your comprehensive presentation. Thank you very much. I'll also just like to take this opportunity to welcome the other participants that joined us as the presentation was going on. You are welcome also to the presentation. And I think it's really exciting for the AEN in terms of this body of work. And I think as Dr. Etale has indicated, some of these findings has already been incorporated in our 3 work streams that we're advancing, namely fostering collaborations amongst those engaging and supporting EIDM, and also increasing knowledge and understanding of EIDM, and thirdly, sharing capacities across the evidence-informed decision-making ecosystem. So we're excited in terms of that we are implementing these findings already to make sure that we respond to the needs of some of our members and other organizations that are interested in the work that the AEN is doing. And with all this work, it assists us to work with others to contribute to the reduction of poverty and inequality, and by increasing the use of evidence in EIDM. So this work is important for us as the AEN. Just before we open for questions and answers, there was one question on the chat, because I was also looking at the chat. Dr. Linda, there's a question that says on slide 14 about activities that enhance evidence use in decision making. Could you elaborate what things organizations are doing for capacity strengthening? I'll hand over to you to answer this question, and then we can open the floor to the participants that are attending.
Sorry, just to say, was it the slide on the activities that enhance evidence use? So this is on capacity and strengthening. That's what they're asking.
Yes.
Okay. So just to say that. Just hold on. Let me hand over to Nasreen as I try to find some of these activities, because there are myriad of them. so that I speak to them substantively.
Thank you, Linda. I'm afraid I don't remember them off the top of my head, but what the initial intent of this question was to just get a sense of all the kinds of activities that organizations consider as enhancing evidence use in decision making. And then depending on their answers to each of these questions, the next question that we had with them was to elaborate. So if they had checked off, for example, communicating research, then we dug deeper into, well, can you give us examples of the kind of activities on communicating research that enhances use in decision making within your organization, but also for other organizations. And each organization would then kind of give us their feedback and their experiences on capacity development in each of these categories within the graph. And without sharing the names of the particular organizations and what they did, Linda, perhaps if you've been able to dig up that information or from your memory, can give some examples perhaps to answer this question as to what kind of activities or examples fell under each of these or one or two of these categories?
Okay. If I may speak to capacity strengthening, this was just they mentioned specific. Some of them mentioned specific say activities. Some talked about training, where they offer certain trainings to on certain specialized areas as organizations to other organizations and individuals. Another one, maybe I can, if I remember again, was about those that actually do mentorship or actually have mentorship programs where they mentor individuals, for example, those that do who work with young people who are interested in monitoring and evaluation as a sector, or rather as a technical area. So they mentor them from university or from colleges, to helping them to dive into the working space and how to use that knowledge. And maybe also those who actually encourage or actually do embedding of staff. For example, if they need a particular, if an organization needs certain capacity strengthening, for example, in certain EIDM capacity area, a staff is moved to another organization for a period of time that they decide on, just to be able to learn from others who have that capacity. So that is what I can speak to for now in terms of capacity strengthening as an activity that enhances evidence using decision making. Then there are others, such as a lot of organizations actually spoke to convening members physically. Maybe I can also talk about how they also convene their members virtually. If you can look at some of they're within the graph. So here's just to say those who have who've been able to come up with communities of practice. So instead of, for example, meeting physically, they meet virtually. Those organizations that are networks, instead of board members, for example, meeting physically, they'll decide to meet virtually, in the sense, in a way that they're able to discuss and steer their organizations or rather their networks in the right direction. When it comes to, like, for example, communicating research as an activity that enhances evidence using decision making, we had organizations that actually had interesting perspectives on how they communicate research and how they use this to enhance the evidence using decision making. So there's those who use, for example, if I may call, entertainment or certain platforms or ways to communicate, for example, with a particular group of people who need to understand evidence. For example, if it's with the communities, if they're going to use theater or storytelling, if it's working with the policymakers using, the right kind of meetings, if it's breakfast meetings, if it is coming along with providing with them policy briefs and things like that. Plus many others that, unless maybe someone has a particular question on specific activities that they'd like me to speak about on the rest, I'll be happy to jump in.
Thank you very much, Linda. I think I would like to take this opportunity to give the participants a time to ask questions or give inputs. So I'll do in a rounds of 3 questions, and then we'll get them answered, and then we'll give another opportunity for 3 questions and get them answered. So that is the opportunity for people to ask questions. Are there any questions for us? Okay, I don't hear anybody asking questions, but there was a question by Ian Hopwood on the chat. Nasreen, would you like to respond to that question to the bigger group?
I have responded in the chat already, but I'm happy to repeat it. So there was a concern about, the low response rate, and we were targeting elites, or what's considered elites in qualitative studies, mid to senior level decision makers, and by virtue of that, we were concerned about the time commitment, the ability to respond to our emails. And so what we did, as in most studies like this, is targeted at least 3 people per institution that had been identified. And as Linda had mentioned, there were 90 institutions that had met the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And so we attempted to target about 270 individuals across those 90. We found that when we were pulling together our list of respondents, that several had either left the organization or that we got bounced emails, and eventually it ended up 252 people that we invited. From those, we had obviously the 36 that finally participated. There were some that had, and Linda has this data, some that had agreed but weren't able to meet the study schedule deadline. And so we weren't able to include those. We had some people who, by nature of studies like this, declined. And then we had some who didn't feel comfortable responding and suggested others that we could speak to. So in the end, the numbers are the statistics that that Linda showed, and it's not necessarily clear to us beyond the fact that the study was restricted in time, whether that affected how many people were able to participate and what the response rate was. As you note, we had 36 respondents across 32 organizations, so it's not like we were able to actually get many people from the same organization. It only happened in 2 or 3 cases, which goes to speak to why we had cast the net fairly wide. In terms of the report, we hope we can get it together in the next month or 2 in a format that's going to be accessible to in a wide variety of formats, short as well as long format for those interested. But the slides will be up in the next day or so, together with the recording of the webinar, we hope. And in terms of whether we assess the quality of the activities that each of these organizations stated that they engaged in, it was actually beyond the scope of this study to evaluate or to assess those activities, rather than capture the wide gamut of them for us to understand what's happening on the continent. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you very much, Nasreen. I've got 2 more questions from the chat. One of them says, what actions or opportunities will you look to prioritize going forward? That's the first question from Ilana. Second one, can you also speak about examples of mentoring of whom and by whom? So that's another question in terms of the mentoring question that was discussed here. I'll hand over to you, Linda and Nasreen.
Okay. Sorry, on the question on mentoring, I think I just maybe briefly highlighted it when I was responding to the previous question. We have organizations that have decided to use mentoring as an activity to enhance evidence use in decision making. For example, maybe 2 organizations say that, or rather they realize that one organization has certain domiciled strengths say in a certain area of evidence-informed decision making. So another organization identifies that, and they work out a way that one or two of their staff are able to go and learn from the organization that has that capacity in that area. But then there are others who, if I can remember very well, about a particular organization that is keen on helping the younger generation of experts who are interested in evaluation, and evidence informed decision making. So they pick up such individuals or who are interested, and they take them through a program, or rather find a way to mentor them so that they to give them a chance to actually work in the markets, because there's a realization that there's a lot of M&D experts in the market, but they don't have that chance to practice. So I might just mention that in a brief way. So the other question was on sort of like the next steps, or what would be taking, well, a way forward immediately, or what we'll be doing with this. Maybe I can just let Nasreen respond to that.
It's a great question, isn't it? It's always about what's the point of these studies if they're not going to, in some ways, provide some kind of direction and ideas about what next and what's important and how does this guide us? And I think that's a great question. So thank you for asking it. Linda shared some of these, and they're on the slide here, but obviously it doesn't dig deep into actual activities that we're going to pursue. And it doesn't actually, we unfortunately weren't able to share with you in detail all the nitty gritty of the recommendations and suggestions that came forward to us. So I think in some ways, we're already, as Sizwe mentioned earlier, there are many ideas that have actually shaped our Evidence 2020 online conference that's going to be held in September, as well as our online festival. So please do keep an ear and an eye out for that. But that it really does speak to how to ensure that in many ways the AEN is member-driven, member-led, and find as many ways as possible to engage with members and leverage their own strengths and capacities to be able to move the field of EIDM forward from multiple perspectives, multiple sectors, multiple cadres across the EIDM ecosystem. We've also got very particular work streams within the AEN that focus on collaborations, that focus on capacity sharing, and that focus on advancing the art and science of EIDM. And many of the recommendations that have come forward are contributing to those work streams. There are some priorities that we've heard over the years, actually, in terms of language and making sure that as a Pan-African network that we find ways to engage and with our Francophone colleagues on the continent, also recognizing we've got Lusophone colleagues, but we've started to translate as much as possible, to communicate as much as possible, and to engage with Francophone colleagues as much as possible. And we are going to take them up on their offers to lead some of our work that could be in French. And that's one thing in terms of inclusiveness for us that's really important. Some of the recommendations are quite out of the scope of AEN, and in some ways what other networks said about members not always understanding the mandate of the network is something we've also faced in terms of whether we were a grant-making organization, whether the AEN engages particularly in courses or in capacity strengthening short course programs, or whether our role is really to facilitate and amplify the activities of other organizations of the continent doing that work. So I think one other priority for us will really be enhancing the clarity about what the AEN does and how it can support colleagues, but also opportunities for collaboration and how we can use our platform to amplify the work of others, including through our newsletter. And of course, we're open to more suggestions and more partnerships with colleagues that are really interested in doing this work. And it's been a great ride so far, and we hope to only make this better. So I hope that answers that question.
Thank you very much, Nasreen. I think we are very close to wrapping up the webinar, I will just give just one last round of 3 questions or comments or inputs, and then we'll summarize and close the webinar. Please unmute yourself if you need to ask a question, and we'll address the question. Okay, I think in the absence of questions, I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending, for participating in this webinar, and would also like you to continue to engage with us through our different platforms, our social media, through our website, and through our ACE email. If you have any questions after we've finished this webinar, because sometimes we look at the presentation and you don't think of questions at that moment, but still there's an opportunity for you to ask us those questions. And the presentation and the recording will be available to all the members that participated to this webinar. So in the absence of any questions or any inputs, as the chair of this webinar, I would like to thank everyone and adjourn the webinar. Thank you very much, everyone.
Let me wish you good speed with your future work, and also we'll collaborate from Dakar, from Senegal, in the building bridges to Francophone Africa. This is Ian Hopwood speaking from Paris, but based in Dakar.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my mom was very cute.